It's Mahia May.
Having the proper drum selection is key in boom bap, especially when you're only using a couple sounds. But what if you can't find the sounds you're looking for? I'm gonna show you how I turned this to this. That's the power of basic drum mixing. It's your boy Mahia Made, and by the end of this video, you'll be able to apply this technique to craft your own unique drum sounds. All right, y'all, so let's go ahead and get started with this breakdown. We're gonna first start off with the drums exactly how I found them when I was searching through my different drum kits. So this is what I started with. So even though I had a good foundation for the type of sample that I chose to flip for this beat, I still thought the kick and snare was just way too aggressive. So off the bat, I already knew I had to make a couple tweaks to these sounds. Let's start digging into what I did to the kick. So before I added any type of plugin, I had to make sure I got both my kick and snare right. I started off by making these changes in the sampler itself. So there are three things I did to this kick. The first thing I did is I turned on this normalize button. I turned it on to make sure my kick was hitting 0 decibels so that it can sound loud and really cut through the mix. The next thing I ended up doing is turning up this out button all the way up to 63%. The reason this is important is because when I was making this beat, I was originally looking for a punchy short kick. I was going through my different drum sounds, but I just wasn't able to find it. So in order to create something I was looking for, I had to work in reverse. So I knew initially I had to start off with a thumpy kick and eventually make those tweaks necessary to get something that was short but punchy. So with the out knob turned up, this is what the kick now sounds like. So as you guys can already tell, we're off to a really good start. The third and final thing I did to this kick in the sampler is turning on the clip knob and boosting it to 5%. What I'm getting by doing this is a little bit more distortion, but it also adds more bottom end to the kick. After making all those changes, this is what the kick now sounds like. Now let's go ahead and move on to the snare. For the snare, I essentially processed it the same within the sampler. This is what the snare sounded like straight out of the drum kit that I found it at. So just like the kick, there are three things that I did to the snare within the sampler before adding any extra plugins. I started off by turning on this normalize button. Next up, I turned up the out knob all the way up to 30%. So the snare now sounds like this. And finally, I once again turned on the clip button and boosted it by 10%. So the kick and snare now sound like this. With just those three tweaks that I made, the drums are already sounding short and punchy. So now that we have the foundation set, we can now move on to the plugins. As I said earlier, it's very basic drum mixing. For the kick and snare, I only use a total of 2 plugins. It doesn't get any more basic than that. For this plugin, I used the Lo-Fi Quiver preset, but I actually turned off essentially everything but the drive knob. I first started off by turning on this boost button. Next up, I turn on the drive button all the way up to 20%. And lastly, what I think is the most important knob from this plugin is this filter knob. I turned up the low pass all the way up to 74%, which took out a lot of those highs from the kick. It's really important that when you use plugins, you know exactly what their purpose is. For me, the purpose for this Tape Mello-Fi was to add a little bit more distortion to the kick and taking off a lot of that top end from the kick, because otherwise it wouldn't have worked well with the sample. So now that we have made the necessary tweaks within the plugin, let's go ahead and turn the plugin off to hear the before and after. So before and after. So as y'all can tell, it's a huge difference. With the snare as well, I only added one plugin, and that plugin is of course RC-20 Retro Color. For this plugin, I used the Vinyl 1 preset. First thing I did, I left this wobble knob on. I left it on in order to add some variation between each snare. However, I did turn it down to 10% because I didn't want the effect to be too noticeable. Next up, I turned on this distort knob and I raised it up all the way up to 30%. Just like the kick, I wanted to make sure that the snare really cut through the mix. And lastly, I used the magnetic knob just as I did the wobble knob. It's giving each snare hit just a little bit of a variation. And now just how important the filter knob was to the Tape Mello-Fi plugin, this tone knob is just as important for RC-20. And essentially what it's doing, it's also cutting off a lot of that top end from the snare. So that was it for the settings for the RC-20. Let's go ahead and turn this plugin on and off to see what the snare sounded like before and after. Before and after. So just like the kick, just one plugin gave me such a big result. So by now, you guys should really understand the power of basic drum mixing. What's really important, however, and what I want to make sure that you guys really understand is that you should always work in reverse of your end result. So in this example, I wanted something short but punchy, so I knew what type of plugins I needed to use to achieve that result. The way you can use this technique to craft your own drum sounds is by taking a second to think about what type of beat you want to make. There are some beats where you might want to add just a little bit more distortion, and there are others, just like this one, where you want to keep it simple but noticeable. So as long as you can keep that in mind, you'll be able to achieve the results you want with only minimal plugins. So that's how you can achieve so much with so little. You can also apply this rule in the way you select your drums, which can make your sample chop stand out so much more. Just click on the link above to see what I'm talking about. With that being said, if you guys gained any type of insight from this video, please leave a like, please leave a comment. It's really gonna help the channel grow. I'm gonna catch y'all next week for a new video. Until then, stay blessed.